And the exit itself. I don't know, you read my bio. I am, unlike these guys who actually run companies and start companies, I'm more of the hired gun who can actually help with all those operational day-to-day things that they don't like to do.
Hi, I'm Matt Wilson. I'm the CEO of Detonator Games. I've been in a lot of different corporate experiences, both at Microsoft and Sony. And my last company, which was Fire Ant Games, was acquired by Sony. My kind of the approach has always been the games entrepreneurial approach. I've learned to leap before I think many times, and over the course of the last acquisition, I learned a lot about this process, and looking forward to getting it done again.
Hi, I'm Todd Hooper. I'm the CEO of Zipline Games. We're a Seattle-based mobile gaming company. I've been an entrepreneur for probably 20 years, better or worse. What's wrong with me? I've sold a number of companies, both in the enterprise, mostly in the enterprise space. I've also acquired a couple of companies when I worked with Bob in a previous life as well. So I feel like I've got a pretty good feel for it on both sides of the coin.
Hi, my name is Daniel Bernstein. I've been in the games business pretty much all my life. I started Sandlot Games in 2002 out of our spare bedroom and sold it in 2011 to Digital Chocolate, and I'm now starting something else.
Great. So just to get a gauge of our audience and who's here, how many of you folks are looking to set up your company to be acquired or go public at some point? Excellent, good. So the first question of the panel is, tell us from your experience the importance of setting up a company to prepare for an exit. Like what kind of things do you need to do legally, you know, the basic building blocks from the beginning?
So I've had experience with this, doing it correctly and also doing it incorrectly. My very first company I set up with my best friend from high school, and we went to our accountant to get it going, and we asked for legal advice, and we're getting, first start, my mistake was I'm getting legal advice from an accountant. And then the second mistake was when he said, you know, what do you think the possible outcomes for this company are? I was young and stupid. I never really thought we would sell it. So we set it up as a partnership, which to anyone who's doing any entrepreneurial stuff now seems completely, stupid. But 20 years ago, I guess there weren't the books and internet to look this stuff up. So when we came to sell it several years later, we took a huge financial penalty in taxes. So I guess since then I've become super absorbed around looking at how to set things up correctly, really dotting every I and crossing every T, everything in writing, everything discussed and then signed in writing, and then I have a copy of it in a file. And then also, yeah, it seems crazy to pay $300 for an attorney. It's far more painful to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxes to the government when you exit. So I guess my experience has been, there's a quote from Frank Herbert, June, which is one of my favorite novels. The beginning is a very delicate time. You can make mistakes in the beginning that you forget about and come back to 3 years later, and you've basically really, really hurt the problems of the exit of your company. And it's usually around things like incorporation, stockholders that are early in the company that may no longer be with the company, and who owns the intellectual property is really the core things that now I've focused very, very tightly on, to the point that people are like, you're getting a little obsessed about this, and I'm like, you know what, when I sold one of my companies, I had to go back and renegotiate 50 licensing agreements to get the deal done, and I don't plan to ever do that again in my career.
Yeah, I think that I would echo the same thing, which is that documentation and organization is key at the beginning, and likewise, I think probably most startups, especially if you're new to startups and you're in the game space, it's a passion-based business, and so typically it's a bunch of guys, or girls or whatever, that you know each other, and you do approach it as a partnership, and documentation is really one of the last things you want to do, but it has to be done, and I think that, on my last company, we didn't really document it that well when we got started, and there was a lot of looseness about how we were running it, and I think that once you have to organize that and get it ready for acquisition, that can take a lot of time. And from my standpoint, that was the thing that really hurt us, was because that time has to be eaten by somebody, and that somebody is usually you. And if you're also running that company or a key factor to the product that's coming out, that can be a distraction.
I think you also have to be really clear with yourself about what you're trying to build. You know, I think when we started out Sandlot, we kind of didn't really, I mean, I bootstrapped it actually, and you know, it was just me at that point, and you know, hiring on a couple of people just to work with me, and that was, you know, that was one of those things that, you know, you realize what you have to do, but you don't want to pay for it now. That's okay, as long as you realize that's what you're going to have to do, and as long as you have a plan for actually solving some of these issues, and knowing who to call. I mean, you really have to know that you're going to pay some money for a lawyer at some point, whether it's at the very beginning to set it up right, or somewhere in the middle to clean it up, or at the end to kind of shovel up all your shit, so to speak. But at some point you're going to be paying some money for it. But realize what you want to do. If you want to really kind of see if you can grow this into a little lifestyle business, then maybe you don't need to do all these things. Maybe that's your definition of success, is just do it, you know, so you have a good job that pays money, and you don't have to, you know, you don't have to report to an asshole boss. I mean, that's a good enough business. I mean, that's fine. But if you're looking to get some investment, if you're looking to do all these other things, if you're looking to do an exit at some point, just realize that you're going to have a conversation, and you're going to have to be ready for that conversation.
So the only thing I would add, just some specifics, and you raised a good point, and if you're going to raise money, there are two things, I guess, early on and all around IP is very often when you start, you have consultants. And if you're not paying an attorney to make sure you have a contract that says this is a work for hire and that you own everything, you will regret that later. And I would venture to bet right now that 100% of you work at companies that use open source software of some kind, and I hope you're abiding by all those open source rules. And in both of those cases, not that you'll always end up in serious legal trouble, is that if you go to sell or go to raise money, all of those will become negotiating points against you if you don't have them all documented in line. I was on the board of Classmates. And when we sold that, we actually had to go back in ancient history of Classmates and renegotiate with 3 guys who had actually done a total of less than 100 hours of consulting so we could actually sell the damn company. That was really painful. Probably as painful, maybe not as painful as Todd's, but it was painful.
Yeah, and open source is one since WatchGuard, I've become a specialist in. And at Zipline, we have a lot of open source, and I'm absolutely very anal retentive about documenting all that stuff. In my case, just anecdotally, when I sold Trillium Lane Labs to Avid, I had all these licensing agreements for content, and there was a clause that if we get acquired, then we can sell this we can pass this licensing agreement off to the acquirer. The problem was it just wasn't strong enough for Avid's lawyers. It was, they had a big Boston law firm. It just wasn't quite strong enough. So they wanted me to renegotiate. And it wasn't a big problem, but the problem is when you go back to renegotiate that and there's money in the air, like we're getting acquired, it suddenly starts getting really expensive. Because people hear the money, they see the money.
So many times when people are looking to be acquired, they have to take on investment along the way to get to that point to where they can be acquired. Sometimes, not always. So when we're talking about investment, we're usually talking about angels and venture capitalists. So angels versus VCs, what do you guys think? Who is the best investor and why? Or why not?
No VCs in here?
Oh, don't hold back.
It's a tough one because for us, we only have experience with angel investors. We've certainly, if you're in the games business, good luck talking to VCs. Really, I mean, that's the reality of it. Unless you're really going to be building a Zynga or something of that level, unless you're going to be a platform or a publisher or something there beyond just being a game maker. So. Don't fool yourself, okay? You're not going to be interesting to VCs if what you want to build is a bunch of games. We weren't interesting as Sandlot, and we had a solid portfolio and really great revenue coming in. I've got a group of folks that they're going to be investing in the next thing that we do, and that's exciting. Obviously we've got a track record at Sandlot. The best thing you can do is network and really focus on angels if you really want to get some investment into your company.
All right, here's where I burn my bridge with every VC.
Here, let me say it for you.
You know, I've raised money from VCs and it's gone great. I've raised money from VCs and it's gone terribly. So it can be really good. As you said, if you're building a content-centric business, VC is probably not the answer. They typically want to see something differently. The challenge with gaming and VCs beyond that is there's probably only 10 VCs that really have a lot of experience in gaming, right? Most VCs are bankers or they come out of the enterprise world. So it's extremely difficult to find the right ones. The big challenge, though, is you really need to be in the Bay Area. If you want to raise money from VCs, you have to be a Bay Area company. If you're in gaming, there's not that many outside the Bay Area that raise it. There are a lot of angels and super angels now. That's the path that we've gone with Zipline, and we've raised over $2 million in angel money. So that's actually worked really well for us. VCs put your company on a very different trajectory. Spend a lot of cash. You know, you're going to lose a lot of equity. It's like it's on steroids. So that's great if that's what you want. They'll look at a lifestyle business as a derogatory term. It's like, oh, you want to have a couple $1 million salary and just, you know, tinker around with your 20-person company. That's actually a great outcome for most people. For a VC, it's not. For a VC, they've got to return hundreds of millions of dollars to their fund to be profitable. So they're looking for the Zynga-size exit. They're looking for the hundreds of millions of dollars of exit. And they've got these massive funds that they're trying to return. They want to put, why do VCs invest $10 million in this company instead of like a couple of million, because that's all they really need? Well, because they have a $200 million fund and they want to do 20 investments. They can't do, you know, 70 investments out of that fund. So it's just a whole different level of pressure. If you're ready for that and you're used to it and that's what you want and you think you can get it and you're not doing a pure content play, we're more of a platform, you know, / publishing play, great. The further you get from the Bay Area, the more difficult it is to do that as well.
Mm-hmm. So for VCs, the return on investment that they're looking at getting, isn't that like around the 5-year mark or something?
You know, I mean, people used to say it's 10x, but it's not just 10x, it's also 10x on a big pile of money, right? So if you're a VC and you have a $500 million fund and you know that 90% of those startups are not going to return significant money, then 10% of them have got to return most of that $500 million. So they want to invest $10 million and get back $100 million. And that's usually when you go public or you have some massive exit. So the mathematics is generally stacked against you unless you have some, you know, knock it out of the park success. So if you take money from a VC and you're just sort of, you know, middling along but not doing that great, you become a zombie company because they don't want to throw more money at you, and they also don't want to spend their time on you because they're trying to work on those 10% of, you know, companies. Is just the sheer economics of the business. So what's really changed in the last 5 years is the angel side, and you know, we don't have as many great angels in Seattle. That's one of the challenges we have here locally, but generally you can access angels. And I mean, Phil, you just raised a bunch of money from angels yesterday. Congratulations. So you know, these super angel funds that actually may have more depth in the space that you're looking to. There's a number of pretty big super angel investors in the gaming space, and generally it's a pretty cool way to go. You can always go to the VCs later if you like.
So I'm going to give the contrarian VC pitch, which I would never believed I would do. At PopCap, they were around, when I got there, 2 months after I got there, we raised $22.5 million. And the lead on that was a VC fund called Meritech Capital, which is in the Bay Area, and they generally do late-stage investments. They are unequivocally the best VC I've ever worked with. There are no other VCs that come close. And I'll sum it up by saying not only do they have practical experience, but when you meet with them and you get in the room, the first thing they don't do is try to prove they're the smartest guy in the room. And I'll let you dwell on what that means for the other VCs that I know and leave it at that. But we did have a huge success at PopCap, but they did put in $22.5 million, and yes, they made 3 times their money in 18 months. All of that's public. You can find that if you want to read the documents. But it was a very, very different outcome, and certainly not one that I've seen in past experiences with companies.
And I'll add a little bit, which is I'm not as familiar with the VC side, but on the angel side, you know, it's really thinking about your company of when you need to take investment, because I think timing is everything. And you know, a lot of people, at least when they start up, they think, oh man, we need a bunch of money to get up and rolling, and that's probably the least important time for you to take money. And so really focusing on what stages you are as a company and how you want to approach that. I think, you know, we bootstrapped for a while. I know you mentioned you bootstrapped, and I think that's a great approach to take early on for as long as you can, because in that way you can be really flexible on how you hire, how fast you get your product out, you know, how you're going to approach it. But at some point you're going to need money to finish that product up or to hire more people, and angel investors usually are a great approach to that. Because they're usually friendly to the company, and not that VCs aren't, you know, I don't have any experience in that, but I do have experience in talking to a lot of different VCs, and their approach is much different. It's a time-based investment, and whereas angels are going to be a little bit more patient on the way that they look at the product, and they're going to be a little bit more flexible. And so I think that, you know, really think about where you are as a company. There's probably a great time to take VC investment, and that's probably when you know you're approaching an acquisition or selling, and you need to really amp that up and you know, push your market a little bit further. But I think it's all about timing and understanding when those investments are available.
So for game companies, what is the most ideal and or the most realistic exit for these types of companies, and what does it take to get there? As far as what are the selling features, what does the company need to look like to get to that point?
I just told these guys that, and I'll just echo it, I mean, before we started, there's a lot easier ways to make money than in the games business. We're not in the games business. Like, you know, let's just cut to the chase. We're not in the games business to make money, right? That's not why we got into it. You know, it's great that we've made money, and we've made money for our investors, and we kind of cracked that nut, so to speak. We can figure out how to do that. Some of us consistently. But at the end of the day, we do it because we love the craft. And I think that's actually the most important thing. That's the reason why that's why I come back to it. You know, I find myself in a different position from a family perspective starting this thing than I did, you know, 10 years ago. But I still go back to it because that's what I love to do. Sure. And unless you love to do it, and just go do something else, because there's really a lot of easier ways to make money. And there's, you know, your hit ratio from an acquisition perspective, you know, I wouldn't say is the lowest of all market segments in gaming, but certainly is not the highest. Go build an enterprise company if you want to have an exit.
They're boring.
So I think one of the things I would say, and it certainly has proven out, so we closed the PopCap deal last August, almost a year ago. We started the process in January, so a year and a half, more than a year and a half ago now. The problem with selling, I'm going to talk about the selling side. There's just, and we were talking about this earlier, there are so many things now in the macroeconomic world that affect the valuation you would get that you have absolutely no control over. So even though you may set your company up perfectly, now's the time to sell for whatever reason. You've been at it, in PopCap's case, for 10 years. There's some need for liquidity. Maybe it's time to find a bigger partner to move it to the next level. You know, we happened to sell at a time when, if you think back, when social companies and game companies were hot, the market was hot, companies, the IPO market was back, and we were able to play a dual track that Dave Roberts, who's the CEO, and I were out talking to a lot of investment bankers, and the talk in the industry was PopCap is going to go public. So that put a lot of pressure on anyone who wanted to buy us. If they wanted to buy us, now was the time to buy us. Otherwise, we're going to end up public, probably with a huge valuation, so you should pay for it now. All of those things that we could play to that market were beyond our control. Now, the value created at PopCap was totally in their control. For 10 years, those guys, those three founders and everybody else, had focused on building great games. That's all they did. And that was really what created the value. We were lucky in terms of selling, that we were able to hit the market at a really great time. And we couldn't control that. If we tried to, anybody from EA here?
There is someone from EA just walked in. Yeah.
Oh.
I see you, Mr. EA.
I suspect, since I still have a non-compete, which is up soon, there's a selfless self-promotion there. I suspect we would not get the same valuation today, just as Zynga stock is at $4.68 or $4 something and not at $10 where they went public. And so I think when you talk about selling, you've got to be prepared. You can do everything right, but if you don't feel you're getting the valuation you want because of those outside things, you got to be willing to back away and start over.
So I think there's one thing that points to what Bob said that I would really stress is that, and this is a mistake that I've learned over the years, I've made personally and learned from. You cannot build a company to be acquired. You have to build a great company that's great at what it does, whether it's building great games or building great enterprise products or whatever it is. And then when the acquisition comes, the acquisition offers will come when you're successful. At WatchGuard, I did corp dev, and so we acquired 2 companies while I was there, and one of them was sort of a flame out. I guess that's ancient history, no one cares. But one of them was really successful. It was a little company acquired for $10 million that we did $200 million worth of business with in the following years. You know, and it was my job to go and find that company. Now, I was sitting at my desk every day, and offers would come in to acquire companies or companies that were in trouble or whatever. They're not the companies that you look for. It's when the CEO tells me we need X, go out and find X. They're going to go and find your company if you're doing a great job, or if they see you in the industry and they think this is something that we want to expand to. When you're, coming hat in hand saying, hey, I want to be acquired, it just doesn't work like that. That's called an asset sale, and it's generally sort of the end of the line for a company. So, the acquisition thing is something you just don't want to be focused around. You want to be focused on building a great company. And then if acquisitions come in, you want to try and manage that and create a market where you've got a couple of opportunities. You can look at it and decide to take it or decide not to take it and keep going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody's going to touch on the same thing, which is that it's hard to just come out and say, hey, we're going to plan to be acquired for X dollars right when you start your company. I think you really have to understand what your company is, build a culture around that, and be successful in that business. And games is particularly hard because it's a hit-driven business. It's a content-driven business. And so because of that, we were actually just talking about this before the thing. It's, people generally have probably a weird valuation of what they believe their company is before it even is anything. And and it's very true. You come out and you say, "Hey, I've got this idea. It's the best new, coolest game that will ever exist on this cool new platform." And there's so many factors that will happen from that idea to when you actually get it out the door, and then past that, actually bring it up to being a evergreen producer for revenue. There's so many factors involved in that's what you really need to focus on is building that business. And so, the question was about different exit strategies. I think there's a variety of different exit strategies, but a lot of it rolls back to what is your company and what is your product. Make that successful, and then those things will come to you, and you'll have decisions. I mean, PopCap's a great example, and loved how they played that at the end. They had different opportunities that they could take advantage of in that space with that market, and there's so many factors that led up to that. And I guarantee you, none of those were thought about 10 years before that when they were working on Bejeweled.
One thing I want to add is that most companies are not PopCap. No offense, but I mean, most companies are not PopCap. Most companies are not Zynga. So, at a certain point, I had to make a reality check, and I think that's what I think a lot of people miss, and they do miss opportunities because we had a lot of inbound interest, and you get a lot of inbound interest, and you say, "Oh, I'm badass! I could just run this thing for 10 years, and I'm just going to sell it for $1 billion, $1 billion." And reality is that's not how it works. When you have inbound interest, that's when it's the best time to sell. It's not when you have to go and create a process and then becomes an asset sale. That's a shitty time. I mean, you really have somebody who's interested in your company. If someone's interested in your company, most likely they are going to pay at least what it's worth and probably a little bit more. If you've got to run a process, then you're probably going to get lowballed.
So when you're looking at the value of a company, is that something that you just know when you get that offer, that's the right one in your gut, that's a good one to go to, or is there like a formula? Is this a Bob question?
So as the finance guy, I'll tell you that when you go to sell your company, if you're growing revenues really, really rapidly, they will not offer you a multiple of revenues. They'll focus on profitability. If your profitability is above average and growing faster than your competitors, they'll want to buy you based on a multiple of revenues. Valuation, look, one thing I'm going to say, because you guys talked about it a little bit, is, and one of the things we did do is if you do end up with a bidder coming in and you want to try and get a competitive bid, which is always good if you can do that, I recommend going and hiring a banker, an M&A banker, for 2 reasons. One is they can help you with the process, they can help you with valuation, they can help you with modeling and all kinds of things. But more importantly than that, They will field all of the bids from those people who will not value your child, your baby, the way you do. And you'll be insulted, and you'll make it personal. So you want to get a banker between you and the buyers to deal with all of those and make sure that no one insults your baby. I mean, I say that sort of facetiously. That's really important, because these guys, I'm sure these guys here, and certainly the guys at PopCap, and including a lot of the PopCap employees, you know, they had worked there a long time. That was their baby. And, you know, some of those initial offers were genuinely insulting, as it turned out. So you want to do that. But the whole valuation thing it's just tricky. It's really tricky. I don't know, you guys can speak personally, right? I mean, I think,
One last thing that I want to add to it is that if you do run a process, you know, you get into a situation that, you know, you don't want to outrun when the market is hot. You know, you guys, I mean, PopCap timed it perfectly. You know, and then, you know, I think other folks like Double Down timed it perfectly. I mean, but you can count those on one hand. I mean, and then imagine how many you can't count because you've never heard of them. They just, you know, fall flat. And so, you know, the other part is if you're, you know, you have to judge the market. You don't have to say, okay, well, you know, I've got competing bids coming in. What's the market going to support? How long is it going to support? Are we going to outrun this thing? Is, you know, is Zynga going to go to 2 by the time we're done with it? And, you know, by then the bankers aren't interested. You know, so, you know, all these things have to kind of play into your decision. Yeah.
Investment bankers, I mean, creating a market is definitely a good idea, and that's true. Although, if you're a small company, a startup, generally you're not going to go to an investment banker, right? Obviously, your PopCap scale is $1 billion exit. I had a chat with someone, investment banker in the Bay Area who specializes in gaming the other day, just because, and you know, they typically don't do deals below $300 to $400 million. You could probably find people here in town that would take a smaller deal, but if it's a $50 million exit, it's probably not, you know, worth their time. So the one thing that they do, however, that is good is they do shield you from that process, because you think about it, right? Company X comes in, they want to acquire you, and you're basically trying to create a market where you've got company Y and Z bidding as well. You don't want to create any bad blood personally with company X, because they're going to be your future employers. So you want to have that bad guy banker that's like, you know, trying to sort of, you know, crank the price on the deal. But as to valuation, I think that's a black art. It's like valuing anything. I mean, it's worth what people will pay for it.
Yeah, and I think the other things to think about as a startup company is, you know, what are you building? What are your assets that you're developing as the company? You know, IP is definitely important and can be valued all over the board, you know, depending on kind of what you think about it and what you think about the future and the sequels and everything else that are involved in that. There's technology, whether it's, you know, VCs love tech. They don't love content, and so, you know, if you can figure out a way when you're developing your product on how to build that out as a technology that can be leveraged across multiple products, that's a way you can increase your valuation, because that's something you can leverage, you know, long term. Patents is something that people don't think about too much in the gaming space, and personally, I hate going through the process, but you know, it's sometimes worth it because that adds value to your company. There's lots of little things that you need to be thinking about, and employees are definitely your bread and butter on some of that valuation. But the thing I think about it is understand what you have so that you can talk in an educated way about the valuation of your company, because I think a lot of people, if you just walk up to your random gaming startup and say how much you think your company's worth, typically they'll just grab something up here and roll it out and say, I don't know, 10, 15 million, whatever, you know, whatever that number is. And not really understand how that's developed. And so I think it's important, you know, if you're running that company, to understand all the key assets that are involved in that process.
So we talked about acquisitions and going public. Tell us what's the difference and how much time and energy and money it costs for each. Is it the same? Is it different? And I think this is a good question for Bob to start off on.
Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, I wonder why. So now notice that John Cook is now in the room, so I want everyone to tell John as they leave I said nice things about VCs. All right. So seriously, let me start with going public, because that is a much longer process. There's a lot of long poles in that tent if you're going to do that. It is not like the good old days where I started at F5 on March 2nd of '99 and we went public on June 4th of '99. So that was a different time and a different era. When I did get to PopCap in August of '09, that was one of the things we talked about. We should prepare the company to go public, and we did a lot of things to get ready for that, and incurred a fair amount of cost because we had to hire a person who was just focused on that, who was doing internal controls and starting to write policies and all of those things. So it's a long process, and we were prepared to keep going, but we had fortunately got into the process of selling before we started to incur a whole lot of costs. But it is a long process to go public. And certainly once you get into registration is where you really start to incur costs, and then afterwards there's a whole bunch. As far as selling, if you've done, some of these guys are telling you the war stories, if you've done a good job of keeping things documented and making sure you've got all kind of dotted the I's, crossed the T's as far as legal stuff, IP, your capital structure, a whole bunch of things that'll be an issue, it's actually fairly straightforward to sell, and it doesn't necessarily cost a whole lot. The biggest expense for us of selling, besides the fee we paid to our bankers, was probably the travel costs and the disruption costs to mostly my internal teams in legal, HR, finance, and accounting. Because once you get into it, the amount of time they suck up is enormous. And yes, PopCap is a bigger scale than your companies right now. It had been around, and we were, I don't know if the numbers are out there, but we were certainly well over 100 million, well on our way towards 200. EA comes into town and they want to talk to you, and let's just take tax due diligence. They want to talk to my tax team. My tax team is one person. They have 32 people in their domestic tax team. They can ask you a lot of questions and take up a lot of time just over tax issues. So that's just one example. It goes on and HR and all the other legal things and all of your subs, and have you really made sure you haven't sold inappropriately? As it turns out, somebody in Iran downloaded one of our games and that actually has, I forget what particular technical thing it has in it, we shouldn't be selling there. I mean, it's just crazy stuff. That's where you eat up a whole bunch of time and energy and distraction. And we haven't got to that. I think one of the big things, if you ever get to, are we going to go public, and that's known internally, are we going to sell, it becomes a huge distraction for the organization. And that is a hard cost to measure, but it's certainly one you want to manage, and it certainly is real.
Sure.
At WatchGuard we did our IPO in '99, same year that you guys went public at F5, and that seems like a pretty complicated, detailed, painful process to me, and it's gotten even worse since then with Sarbanes-Oxley. So, I think for most companies, going public is a beautiful dream to put out there. Realistically, if you're the founder of the company and you're going public, you're most likely not going to be the CEO during the IPO process. There are some exceptions, Zuckerberg, Pincus, but many companies will go and hire a professional CEO. So I think it's a great thing to put out there. I wouldn't get too, and it's going public is an incredible opportunity. I wouldn't get too hung up about it. Most of the companies that are out there that are acquiring you are already public entities, and they've grown to that scale where they can't innovate very quickly, that are out there actively acquiring companies. The thing I learned about being acquired a couple of times and then also doing acquisitions is that you've got to try and set some bounds on the process. If you have 32 people from the domestic tax team at EA, they could take 9 months of your time to get through the due diligence checklist. So what you really need to have is some sort of forcing function. And if you've created a market for your company and you have multiple people interested in it, then part of the term sheet that you negotiate should be that we're going to close this deal in 30 days or we're going to walk away. And I've managed to do that successfully at some companies and unsuccessfully at others, and the difference is pretty dramatic. If the buyer knows that the clock is ticking, they won't send in 32 people to check that stuff. They will just figure out what are the high-risk items. And of course, on a much smaller scale, there isn't that much detail to pour through. You'll get the deal done a lot quicker. So I think the IPO thing, I don't lie in bed at night wondering, oh my God, which bank am I going to choose for our IPO?
For us, I guess having the due diligence process and having everything fully on the server and character, everything was there. So we're actually, from that perspective, we're pretty ready to go. I spent mental gymnastics and trying to figure out exactly how to, because we had such a small team, who to pull in and how to say it so that there's we don't risk any NDAs and all this other stuff. So that's also the other part, how to run the process so that actually you get the people involved that you need to get them involved without letting them know that what they're being involved for, and that create something. And we had an office in St. Petersburg as well, so part of the due diligence was actually flying over there under a pretext that we're there to look at, to just, work on with the team on the projects and that type of thing. All of a sudden all these new people come in, and so try to manage all that stuff as well. So, figure it out ahead of time. Don't just walk into that meeting and think that you're going to be able to manage your employees.
Yeah, I have really no experience on the IPO side, but I would agree on the acquisition side that our team was pretty small, and it can be a fairly large distraction, especially when your core focus is trying to get a product out. And I agree, it's like the bigger the company is that's trying to acquire you, the more input they're going to have, or more questions they're going to have, or how the forms are going to be longer, or that kind of thing. And I think your approach of the timing is holding them to a line is an important thing. And I think all negotiations get to that point. So why not put it up a little earlier? Because eventually they do drag you into the approach where you have to draw a line. But in my case, it definitely was a lot longer and a lot more impactful. And again, we had to do the same thing. You have to bring in employees that may be critical on some technology that you're working on, or that kind of thing, to answer a lot of questions. And also, it seems like at the beginning, it seems like it's going to be a short process. Everybody kind of shakes hands, and it seems like, hey, we're going to move. We're going to move. This is going to be fast. I think about that every contract too, by the way. But in the end, a lot of people have to get involved, and a lot of questions that you might not be prepared to answer. And I think we've heard from all of us on this. It's organization is key on this process, because at some point you're going to have to do it, and doing it at the end is very painful. And so I think all of us are probably now way more prepared on the, hey, let's do it a little bit at a time. Be prepared so it's not a big time suck at the end.
Well, we're going to go to questions in just a moment. I'm going to have you guys offer one last word of wisdom to our group, and then we'll open it up for questions. So, Bob, let's start with you, if you want, or do you want to pass it off to Daniel?
The only thing I will say, if you find yourself in, selling the company, one of the key things, I've seen many deals fall apart. I reflect back to classmates where a couple of deals fell through. That you need to make sure that at the buyer, the person who's driving the process actually has the power and is at the right position within that organization to drive it all the way through their organization. Very often what I see happen is somebody gets excited. I'll pick on Todd. It might have been somebody in Todd's role who was really excited about the deal, but as he brought, say, this technology or whatever it is to more people within WatchGuard, all of a sudden they go, no, that doesn't really fit our bill. But Todd was really excited about the deal. Then all of a sudden your deal, that's going to fall apart. And so you got to make sure you got the right person at the acquiring company who's driving the acquisition, from the buyer side. I don't know if you want to add to that. Or
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's not a deal until you have a term sheet. So you might get people excited in the company, but that's just the nature of business. And it's good to have an advocate in the company, but if it's not the person with the authority to sign a check, then it doesn't matter. I guess the one thing I would say is, it goes back to that, the beginnings, is have everything in writing, have a good lawyer. Any person that walks through the door of Zipline Games to do some work for us, day one has a signed contract. I know who they are, what we're paying them, who owns the intellectual property. When I sign deals now, I make sure that the deals are assignable on an acquisition and it has a really strong thing. Lots of stuff I learned at WatchGuard. NDAs, all that sort of stuff just seems so trivial. Let's do it later. Oh, it never got signed. You can't afford to slip on that stuff, because what will happen is, if you do a bad enough job of it, especially with things like open source, that can just be a deal killer straight there. As you go through the due diligence process, the deal will fall apart. So I think that's a problem that you can't really solve easily later on. It's something to think about now. All the other stuff about creating a market and finding the right folks to sell the business to and creating a great business, you can get a lot of help with that, with investment bankers and with people around. And so as long as you know to ask for help at that point, you'll probably be fine.
Say you've done everything right. You've got everything documented, and I'm fortunate that my wife was our attorney, so everything was, all the transfer, all that stuff was done, all the NDA. I didn't have to worry about any of that, so I was very fortunate from that perspective. But say the deal falls apart. So, how you react to that deal and how do you react to that and move forward and continue to run your business, and is really critical, because you just need to keep going. You know, it's just business. You know, there is not a reason why something falls apart sometimes. It just does. So you just keep going. You just run your business. And then something else comes in, and it may fall apart again. You just keep going. You keep running your business. You know, you never lose focus on, you know, the focus is not, okay, I've got an acquisition. That's not the focus of what you're doing. The focus is running your business. If the acquisition happens, awesome, good job. But if it doesn't, you're still running your business.
Yeah, I mean, this is the games business, and you know, without a good product and a good business, and the passion around that business, really, and being successful in what you're working on, all the other stuff we talked about is kind of irrelevant. And I think that you really got to prepare yourself to have a good business and a good product, and really focus on building that business. And other things will come, just like you mentioned. And as much as we all think about acquisition and want to prepare for acquisition, really it's about being successful in your business, and you know, having good business practices, you know, and having a focus on that product, and not getting distracted. And I kind of echo the same thing, which is that things come and go, and probably the amount of contracts or failed acquisitions or acquisitions that fall apart, I would not even want to guess how many that outnumbers the ones that are successful, but it's ridiculous, and it's really easy to get distracted about it. And setting, you know, a timetable so that you don't get drugged down, because it's very easy to spend a lot of effort on things that will never progress, and you know, really knowing how to get someone to say no. And I always have the philosophy that no is almost as good as a yes. And it's absolutely true.
All right, we're going to open up for questions. There is a microphone over here. Any questions? We must have done a really good job covering the topic. Oh, good.
I'll jump up. So have you guys ever had any experience or concerns with the possibility of somebody acquiring your company not in the games business, so in the product business or the media or entertainment space, where they're not familiar with games on the whole, but they see you as an asset and sort of aligned with their missions? And if not, what are some concerns that would come up just off the top of your head right now around that?
It really depends on what you personally want to achieve. I mean, if someone comes in with an offer and they're willing to acquire the company, you know, if it's a company you love and you want to keep running it, but then the chance for, you know, personal wealth and, you know, wealth for all of your team as well, I don't think it's something that you necessarily would sort of reject out of hand. The challenge is, what's your role going to be inside that big media company or whatever? That can be more challenging. You do hear, I mean, I know someone personally that sold their company pretty successfully to a large company in a different business, and there was just no fit there. It turned out they had all these plans and dreams of how things were going to work, and there really wasn't a fit in the end. So that can happen, but you know, even if that happens, you still sold the company. If that was your goal, then that's actually probably fine. It's less likely to find those sort of, you know, relationships where there's not obvious synergy. I haven't personally had it happen to me.
I think that actually you have to get it in your head that when you sell your company, you're not in control of it anymore. And you know, that irrespective of who you sell it to a guy down the street, or you sell it to Viacom, or you sell it, you know, it doesn't matter. You're not in control anymore. Just deal with that. If you can't deal with it, don't sell your company. Right. You know, and it doesn't matter who you sell it to. That's just the way it is. And you know, so yeah, I mean, I figured that out pretty early on. So.
Milton said, "It's better to rule in hell than serve in heaven."
Thanks, guys.
All right, any other questions?
I have one more.
I'm going to repeat the question just so it can be on the camera.
So specifically raising money from angel funds and super angels. So, you know, some of the super angels in Seattle, the Founders Co-op is one that I guess, I mean, I mean, the definition of super angel is pretty loose. You could say they're a small VC or a super angel fund. You know, in that case, it's just a personal connection there. I think the super angels tend to be certainly doing far more due diligence than an angel would. Often you'll meet with an angel investor, they like you, you already have some connection. They may not be a subject matter expert, but they're looking to make some, you know, highly speculative investments. So you might have a couple of meetings and they'll invest. I mean, many of our angel investors, that's how it's gone. The super angels tend to want to see more of a compelling pitch. So they're a little bit more like VCs in the sense that if it's a content-heavy games pitch, it may be a little tougher. Yeah, I mean, where are you based? Okay, so I would definitely, you know, look at people like Founders Co-op as one good super angel fund. Yeah, the groups like Alliance of Angels and Keiretsu and the Xeno Society, I don't know if I'd call them super angels. They're more investment clubs. And is there anyone from those groups here? Well, John's here. You know, I've never used, let's just say I've never worked with any of them. How's that?
The only comment I would make on angels, super angels, whoever, in my experience, and I'm the guy, right, finance, so I care about what my capital structure looks like. And, you know, when it comes to shareholders, less is better, just to be clear in my mind. So if you go to angels and everything, you end up with a whole bunch of shareholders. They all have equal rights under the law and various things, and you have to manage them all, regardless of whether, even if they don't have board rights or anything like that. It just becomes a little bit trickier. So that's my only caveat whenever in companies where we've gone to raise money from individuals, is just paying attention to who those individuals are and what's, you know, what does this investment really mean to them? You know, we had an investor in PopCap who bought some shares of the founders and stuff who happened to be a college roommate of the CEO. Yeah, he put money in that was totally irrelevant to him. Now, he was active in the business, but, you know, he was easy to manage in that respect. I just don't know. I'm always very cautious of that. That's just my personal one. I'm not trying to make a personal judgment of any of those investors. I'm just saying if you have multiple investors, it's a lot harder to manage.
And angels can come in a variety of different educational formats, meaning that some of them are well educated in the business you're in, and some of them are an aunt or an uncle that just want to invest some money into the product. And I think if there was anything that I kind of learned from the process is that management aspect of your investors. And obviously less is more in investors always, and figuring out exactly how educated your angel investor is and how you want to manage that, expectations, changes in the direction of the company, changes in the direction of the product, you know, a variety of things that go on, especially in games. Some of them don't care at all, and some of them care deeply, and it doesn't really relate to how much they invested.
Right, and just to be clear, when I'm saying angels, I'm saying, you know, the current trend is you raise money using promissory notes. So you're not issuing stock, you're not setting a valuation for the company. There's a great post by Paul Graham on high resolution financing that talks about that process that I would definitely recommend you look at. But you know, these are people that are committing to the mission of the company, but you're not necessarily giving them board seats either. I mean, that's an absolute killer. If you're going to grow the company and you've brought people on early and they have director level board seats, you know, that may be a great fit in the future, but it also may not be. And you'll see when people go to VC financing that, you know, the composition of the board, ownership, who owns pieces of the company is sort of a temporary phenomenon. Control of the company, e.g. the directorships, that's permanent. And that's something you have to manage very, very carefully as the CEO.
Well, we went a little over our time, but I want to encourage, if you have a question, go ahead and approach our panel. I want to thank you all for coming, and thank you to our great panel for a great discussion. Thanks.